Hello everyone, this is Phil Style from the Storm of War server and 54 Squadron. Well, I just received the chat message, better respond. And this video is a tutorial on basically flying the Blenheim bomber. What I'm going to cover in this video is first of all pre-flight, so I'm just going to discuss the loadout options. Then I'm going to talk you through the startup procedures, what keys you'll need to map or which controls to use. And then we'll have a quick look at the ground handling. I'm then going to talk you through the takeoff, and then we'll also discuss basically the climb out, which is specific for this aircraft. We'll then do a bit of level flying, and we'll talk quickly about navigating in the Blenheim. We will try and get to a target, at which point we will look at the BOM aiming and the BOM release. And then we will finally discuss approach and landing. Sorry about my head moving around all the time there. I was just glancing down at a piece of paper which had my sort of contents material. Okay, so without further ado, let's look at pre-flight and loadout. Okay, now before we get too far down this process of how to actually maneuver and fly the Blenheim, let's have a quick look at the setup of this aircraft before we even spawn in. This is the loadout options screen for the Blenheim, and what I recommend doing first is dragging the fuel slider well down. If you're just flying across the narrow point of the channel, you can probably get away with about 15% fuel. And if you're flying across the wide part of the channel, you're going to need somewhere around 40 to 50% fuel to get there and back. I'm going to take 45% fuel in this case. One thing to note is that the Blenheim is quite difficult to get airborne with more than about 70% fuel. You need a lot of runway, a good headwind, and you need quite a bit of flap. So you'll notice that it's even fairly difficult to get airborne with 45% fuel. I don't worry too much about the two guns here. I just leave them at default. And what I'll do is in the central bomb bay, I'm going to stick 4 250-pounders. That's my standard loadout. You can see I've got a few pre-saved ones here, but basically I take 4 of the 250-pounders. You can take 2 500s if you want. I prefer to have a larger number of smaller bombs because my bombing is not that accurate, so more eggs is better. Let's just check the gun screen. Basically there's nothing to do on the screen. The rear gun is a single gun, so convergence doesn't matter. The key screen really is the bombs tab, which is the third tab along the top. So I need to change the settings for my 250-pounders, which are the bombs I'm currently armed with. I'm taking the number 28 Mark 10X, Mark 2X pistol. That's the ever ready detonator. And I'm going to leave the delay on 11 seconds. Even though we're doing medium bombing, we could go with a 0-second delay, but I always have that set to 11 seconds because often I would be doing low-level bombing, and if I forget to change this, then the bombs will blow up right underneath me when I drop them. Okay, so that's my suggested loadout for level and low-level bombing in the Blenheim for beginners. Okay, so now it's time for part 2 of this tutorial video, which is the startup and the ground handling. So first thing I'm going to do is just make sure that my propeller pitch and throttle controls are set to 0. I just pulled my throttle and prop back. So I'm sitting here currently at RAF Watchfield on the Storm of War server, and I'm going to first of all put my chocks in, and I use the C key for that. No message pops up to tell me it's done it, but I know it's happened. And you can see that in the bottom left hand corner of my screen here I've got the digital settings for both engines showing. By default for the fighter boys, this window will probably be quite small and it will only show one engine. To get it to show 2 engines, you just alt click on the window and then just expand it out laterally using the edge of the window there just until you can see both engines. So there's one showing, there's two. I have the green text in very small, so it's a bit hard to see, but it is there on the bottom left hand corner of my screen. Now what you're going to need to have is you're going to need to have at least 3 engine keys mapped. The first one is to toggle engine 1, the second one is to toggle engine 2, and the third is to select all engines. Well, sorry, the first one should be to select engine 1, the second one to select engine 2, and the third to select all engines. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to select all engines, which for me is mapped to the Q key on my keyboard. And then I'm just going to check that the prop, the throttle, and the radiator are all set to the correct settings. So that's throttle on 0, prop on 0, and radiator to 100% for startup. Now we're going to turn on the fuel cocks, and glancing over my right hand shoulder here, you'll see these 2 wheels, the green one and the red one. You can use the mouse and you can click on them and that will open them, or you can have a pre-assigned key for each. I have a pre-assigned key for each, so I'm going to turn fuel selector number 1 to the outer, and then I'm going to turn it to the inner, and now I'm going to do fuel selector number 2, outer and inner. You'll see those 2 wheels rotate. And top right hand corner of my screen you can see the secondary control text says that both are now set to the inner. So both my fuel tanks are now open. Chocks are still in. I'm now going to select engine 1. So I'm just pressing my select engine 1 key on the keyboard. It's bound to a keyboard. And I'm going to increase my prop pitch to 100%. The prop is just a 2-stage prop, so it's either 100 or 0, fine or coarse. Now I'm going to set the throttle to about 8%, 7%, and I'm going to hit the ignition key. And remember, just engine 1 is selected. So there we go. That's all there was to it. Engine 1 is now turning. Now remember, I've got the chocks in. If you have the chocks out, you may find the aircraft starts twisting on the spot as soon as you ignite that single engine. If you have the chocks in, you don't need to worry. Okay, now let's select engine 2, which is the starboard engine. Engine 2 is selected. I'm going to now set the throttle again, because you can see that the throttle is set to 0 for engine 2. So I'm moving my throttle control. Throttle is set to 8%. Now I move the prop control. Prop is at 100 and the rads are full open. It's now time to hit the ignition key again. So there we go. Engine 2 is now on. Now, most critically now, you need to select all engines before you start taxiing. So I'm hitting the select all engines key, and I'm just going to quickly check that both engines respond by reducing the throttle to 0, and both show as 0, and both are rough running. So let's just throttle back up. Okay, so now we're ready to taxi. That's all you need to do to get the Blenheim basically switched on and engines running. So now let's look at ground handling. So for the ground handling or taxiing, I'm going to keep the throttle set to full fine, which is 100% on the digital readout. I'm going to remove the chocks, and you'll notice at 10% throttle or 14% throttle, it's already starting to move. Now I've got a bit of twist to the right there, but that's okay. So I'm just going to apply throttle. No real engine warm-up is required, and you can see I've pushed the throttle up to 50% to start with. I'm taking my feet off the rudder. Now there's no rudder. You can see what's happening, a lot of torque to the right, so just reducing throttle, and I've got lots of left rudder, and I don't know if you can see my foot pedals down there, but you need a fairly decent amount of left rudder to hold this thing in a straight line. So there I'm taxiing in a straight line, 30% throttle, and I've got probably nearly a half or a third of left rudder input. Okay, and you can just kind of dance on the rudders to keep the aircraft steady. So you can taxi fairly comfortably at about 30% throttle. I'm now actually just going to turn so that the wind is behind me, and then I'm going to do a 180 degree turn into wind. So now you can see the speed has crept up quite quickly. I'm now reducing the throttle back to 18% for this taxiing. And what I'm going to do is, in a second, when I get close to the end of this runway, because I'm probably going to need the full runway length, I'm just going to kick the aircraft around, and I'm going to apply the brakes at the same time, and we'll try and do a little bit of a relatively high speed turn. Okay, I'm just getting into some rough ground here. So 0 the throttle, left rudder, brakes on. Not quite as good as I hoped. Okay, so I've got the brakes fully on, both brakes. Okay, so that's a bit about ground handling. Basically, it wants to pull to the right. You need judicious amounts of left rudder, and you can taxi between, give it a push up to 45% throttle just to get yourself rolling, and then you can bring that down to about 15 to 18. That'll give you a probably 20-30 kilometer per hour taxi speed, which is pretty fast, much above the recommended walking speed, but you can push these things around the airfield quite quickly. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the takeoff and climb. So for takeoff and climb, I'm already facing into wind and I've got the chocks back in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to advance to full throttle, and I'm just going to lower a fraction of flap. The flap operates on a mechanical servo, which means it's unlike the Spitfire. The Spitfire, you drop the flap and the whole panel just drops down in one go. The flaps on the Blenheim will drop gradually, so you can apply a specific amount of flap. And let's do that now. So I'm just going to move the flap to the neutral position first. That's toggle down, and then I'm going to hit flap down again, and you'll hear it, and then back to the neutral position. So I applied about, I don't know, 4 seconds of flap there. That's enough, I would expect. Now for takeoff on the Blenheim, I'm going to first advance the throttle, applying left rudder, and we'll start rolling at about 30%. I'm going to fairly quickly and smoothly advance the throttle all the way to 100%. I'm then going to engage the boost cutout once I get a bit of airspeed so that I know the engine will remain cool. And just before I'm about to pull the wheels up, I'm going to disengage the boost cutout, and then we'll adopt a climb attitude. Climb attitude is with nose fairly low. You can't really yank this thing up, not with bombs and fuel on like you can a fighter. So let's do that now, advancing the throttle up to about 30%. I'm now disengaging the chocks and advancing the throttle further. Left rudder, left rudder, left rudder to stay steady. There we go. Aircraft's moving forward now. And I'm just applying left and right rudder to correct the nose swing. Okay, a bit more left rudder. You can see it's a slow takeoff speed. Now I'm going to apply the boost cutout. Boost cutout's on. Just retard and then advance the throttle. Now at 110% throttle. All I've got to do is wait for the nose to come down. The nose is dropping now. Hands are off the stick. That's happening entirely naturally. I haven't touched the stick. Okay, the aircraft's now settling into a nice fast takeoff roll. The speed's advancing through 110 miles per hour. I'm just going to gently bring the nose back. Gently, gently, gently. There, the wheels are off. I hear them stop rolling. And I'm now going to advance the gear up very quickly, take the boost cutout off, and bring those flaps up. So all 3 actions in a fairly quick succession. Boost cutout off, bring the gear up, and bring the flaps up. And look at the attitude I'm holding. Basically, the bottom of the gun sight ring is on the horizon when I'm fully zoomed out. That's about the attitude you need. Maintaining a good speed now. Airspeed's coming up through 160 miles per hour indicated. So I've got good airspeed, and I'm trimming back. So now I've trimmed back on the elevator, and I'm going to give it about 5 or 6 notches of left rudder trim, a couple of nose down trims, and now I'm hands off. The aircraft is now climbing itself 180 miles per hour. So now it's time to just give the engines a bit of a rest. The first thing I'm going to do is reduce the prop pitch back to coarse. And you can hear the change in tone. I'm just going to trim back trim nose down a fraction. There we go. That gun sight sitting there on the horizon nicely, the base of the gun sight. And now I'm just going to bring my throttle back to about 85%. And that is a very safe running, even in the climb for the Blenheim. Coarse pitch, 85% throttle, and rads full open. So there you go, my hands are off now, off the rudder and off the stick. The aircraft is maintaining this attitude. It's probably just dropping those low a bit, so let's just trim a couple times up on the elevator. And there we go, we're now climbing. Which brings us to the next part of this tutorial, which is actually the climb out. So this is a climb out you can employ after takeoff, but it's going to take you some time to get up to altitude. You can see that I'm climbing at about 900 feet per minute, and I really want to try and climb at about 1,500 to 2,000 feet per minute if I can. So I'm just going to turn south here, just bringing the aircraft around to the south. You can see that it's just a little bit framey. The FPS has just dropped a bit, and I think that's because of the clouds tend to do that. I've also got a Windows Aeros theme running at the moment, so I could capture the loadout screen before, which also gives me FPS reductions. Okay, so let's have a look at a fairly steeper climb now. I'm going to increase my throttle to about 95%. I'm not going to change propeller pitch. I'm going to keep that on full course, and I'm just going to maintain this attitude for a little bit longer until my speed comes up. And you can see my speed is now approaching 195 miles per hour down there on the ASI. And I'm just going to trim the nose into the climb position. So I'm trimming, that's about 3 clicks of the trim. That's the elevator. And I'm going to put the base of that pin, that center gun sight pin, the thing that's got the little bobble on top of it, I'm going to put the base of that on the horizon. I'm just going to put my head back into the position on the headrest. Okay. So there we go. I've got the base of that pin on the horizon, and you can see that bar that goes across in front of the bombardier's face. That is also about on the horizon. The tops of the engine cowlings are sitting just above the horizon, and the back of the engine, basically behind the radiator flaps, is dropping down below the horizon. Now you can see I've got, just trimming back up again, the aircraft does slow down and then the nose drops. You have to fight this for some time. But you can see now I've got about 1,400, maybe a fraction less, feet per minute climb. Airspeed is 160, which is good enough to keep the engines cool. Just going to check them. Yeah, 55 and 52 on the oil. Oil pressure's okay. Temps are okay. RPM is at 2200, which is okay. Probably a little bit high on the RPM. I wouldn't want to run this that way for terribly long, but it's good enough for starters. Now you can see my speed is increasing to 4,500 feet. I can maintain this climb until about 8,000 feet. From that point, I need to pay a lot more attention. Excuse me. From about 8,000 feet onwards, I need to pay a lot more attention to my engine temperatures. The Blenheim will overheat very quickly at altitude. I don't know how high anyone's ever managed to get these things, but I would suggest altitudes between about 6 and 14,000 are your ideal altitudes. As you can see today, we've got cloud base at around 5,000 feet, so I probably would not be bombing higher than 5,000 feet today. Okay, that is takeoff and climbing in the Blenheim. Now let's look at level flight and navigation. So I'm going to drop the nose back down. I'm using the trim, just a little push here and there on the main control column, and I'm going to settle the nose back down into a level flight attitude, which is basically halfway between the center of the gun sight and the bottom of the gun sight on the horizon, about there. Actually, that's a good marker to use. That green bar that goes across there, just below the horizon. That gives me level flight, and I've still got 90% throttle, so I'm going to reduce that to 80. So there we go, 80 throttle, and this is a good cruise in a fully laden Swallow. I've got 200 miles per hour on the clock. I'm in level flight. In fact, I'm in a slight climb, and I'm at 5,500 feet, which is quite nice. I can push this thing to do 240. However, for a beginner, someone who wants to treat the Blenheim with a bit of respect and conduct a long flight across the channel and back, I would recommend about these settings. I know some guys fly around with 100% throttle and about 60% radiators, and that is doable. I suggest you just try it out yourself. Once you're in level flight, you can reduce the radiators, get a bit more speed. I suggest you just try those settings out yourself and see how long the engines last. Guys like Coldstreamer and a few others can fly these things around all day like that. Okay, so now we're in level flight. Let's talk about using the navigation system, and particularly the autopilot. So what I'm going to do is first of all, I'm going to zero my gyroscopic compass, this thing down here, and what I'm going to do is just click on the button that's at the base of it. Very difficult to see, with these dark cockpits. Let me just try turning the cockpit light on. Makes no difference. Just under the gyroscope, there's the decrease and increase button. So I'm just going to click increase a few times. In the top right hand screen, you'll see the numbers climbing. I'm going to click that until it hits 0. There we go, 0. Now that that hits 0, all I need to do is hit the autopilot key twice. So it first goes to normal autopilot and then it goes to the mode 22, which is basically a compromise that Team Fusion have made to use the equivalent German system. So I'm going to hit it once and then I'm going to hit it twice, and now you'll see my aircraft nose is going to drop, but it's holding the heading nicely. My hands are completely off now. The nose will drop for a bit, it'll gain some speed, and I would lose about 500 feet, 400 feet. You can see that I was at about 6, I think. Now it's dropping down 5.8. It looks like it's going to settle on 5.7 maybe. Okay, so we're cruising along at 5,700 feet. My hands are completely off now. My feet are off, my hands are off. The Blenheim now is holding the heading. I can change the engine settings, but this thing now is just going to keep flying and flying and flying and flying on that preset heading, and I don't need to do a jolly thing. I can make small adjustments to the heading simply by increasing and decreasing the gyro. So if I go if I click say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times on the gyro, you see the nose moves to the left. And if I click 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times there on the left side of the gyro, the nose moves to the right. So it's using the gyroscope, the directional gyroscope here, to actually point the aircraft in the right direction. 0 means continue in the same heading. Okay, if you set it to 0, it won't point the aircraft north. It will just keep the aircraft heading where you've pointed it. If you set the gyro to 45, it will move the aircraft 45 degrees away from your current heading. Okay, so don't think of this as a geographical compass when you are using the autopilot. Just think of it as a aircraft centric system. 0 meaning maintain the current heading. Okay, that's what that means. So now we've covered level flight and navigation. Let's have a wee look at BOM aiming. So for the purposes of BOM aiming, of course we're going to move to the BOM aimer's position. And for me that's Shift C on my keyboard is the key binding to switch positions. So this is what life looks like from the BOM aimer's position. Quite nice. And there's all my kit down there. So let's have a quick look at what you need to manipulate on this piece of kit. Basically, your key dials are this one here where my mouse is, the increase and decrease sight velocity. Basically, you need to set this to the same setting as your ASI. Fortunately for the Bombardier, there's an ASI right here. And this tells me I'm currently doing 210 miles per hour. Now I'm at 5,500, 6,000 feet. So there is some slight difference between my actual ground speed and my indicated airspeed and my true airspeed, but I'm only at 5,500 feet, so the differences are negligible. So I'm actually just going to set this to, and if you look in the top right hand corner of the screen, you'll see the numbers going up. 130, and I'm just going to click it about 1, 2, 3, 4, how many is that? 210. Right, so that's now set to 210. Look in the top right hand corner of my screen, secondary controls. So now my airspeed and my bomb sight velocity are equal. Next, I need to change the sight altitude, and that's this one here on top of this marvelous sticky thing. And I'm going to increase or decrease that to match my actual altitude, which, happy days, is on my altimeter here. Now, I did not calibrate my altimeter to 0 when I took off, and the landscape here is undulating, probably up to 300 or 400 feet because there's lots of hills and whatnot. But to be honest, a few hundred feet of altitude change probably isn't going to make terribly much difference at this altitude and at this relatively low airspeed. So I'm just going to put those two things to match. So let's increase the sight altitude from 3,100 to, what am I at now? 5,800 feet. So I'm just clicking on the right of that. You can bind these two controls. I don't fly this aircraft terribly much, so I don't have it bound. And to be honest, when you're flying like this and you've got the time and you've got the autopilot on, you can afford to use the mouse and click around the cockpit like this. If you're in a hurry, you might want to have it bound to a key. Okay, so we've now set the bomb sight velocity. We have set the sight altitude to match our instruments. Now we're going to get down and look through the gun sight itself. For this, I press Shift L on my keyboard, which is my lean to gun sight option. So it's lean to gun sight. And now if I zoom in and out, my view will automatically lock in on those two conical looking pins there. So those are my two pins, and whatever object is perfectly under those pins is the object upon which my bombs is going to fall. So I'm going to zoom out. Now let's see there's let's pick an object in the distance that's fairly far away. Okay, you can see up ahead of me, well, you may be able to see, I'll just shift out of this gun sight view. Up ahead of me there's a small kind of oblongish lake where my mouse is now. It's a long elongated square lake. Basically I'm going to use that as my target. So back to the gun sight. Now I need to make sure that that lake is tracking down the path between these two wires here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring the aircraft to the left slightly, which means I need to use my my course adjuster, and I'm going to use course adjust left. You can see in the top right hand corner it says Kurssteuerung. That's the course adjuster, and I need to just bring it left a few notches. I'm basically adjusting the directional gyro by doing this, and I've got that set on my keyboard. Okay, I think I'm lined up now, so let's just see what happens. And as soon as that lake comes into the center of these two pins, that's when I want to drop my bombs. And the drop bombs button is here on the left. Okay, I need to come to the right more. I'm just going to do 2 notches to the right. Now we're going to, 1 notch to the left. Okay, we're just about over the lake. In 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to start dropping. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, there's 4 bombs gone. So that's all there is to it. Now I'm going to go out of here. I'm going to switch back to the pilot. Just turn the autopilot off. Whoops, it's not the pilot, it's the rear gunner. Just turn the autopilot off and we'll see if the bombs landed anywhere to target. I'm just throttling back. And we'll just look. Oh, I need to get away from this lake and then come back at it. Let's just... Okay, there's the lake down there underneath my left wing now. Bombs should be just about... Oh, yes, you can see a splash. 1 bomb on the lake. There's a splash there. There's the explosion. There's another explosion. There's another explosion. And there's a 4th explosion. So 2 bombs landed in the lake and 2 fell short. So you can see I was a little bit short of my target. But for all intents and purposes, that worked pretty well. And there's a couple of craters down there you can see. The other 2 that fell inside the lake itself, they won't have made craters. Okay, so that is how to do your bomb drop. Now we're going to look at approach and landing. Right then, you cheeky little monkeys. I found myself an airfield down there, and it is at Southampton. It's actually called Southampton on the map. That's the town of Southampton over there. Some barrage balloons floating about in that direction. And I'm at 4,000 feet, and what I want to do is land down there. Now, I know from earlier that the wind was basically coming from the west, which is behind me. This runway looks to be orientated almost north-south, but I think it orientates slightly west in that direction down towards the Isle of Wight. So I want to approach from over there somewhere. So once I get basically parallel to the airfield, I'm going to turn left and do a very wide circuit. And I'm going to start off in this descent by bringing my throttle back to about... Oh, it's going to happily sit at 9% without shuddering and juddering. And I don't really want my airspeed going up above about 220, 230. There's just no need for it. There's no hostiles around. This is not an emergency landing. So you can see my glide attitude here. I've got about 5 degrees nose down, shall we say, maybe a bit more. And that's a pretty pleasant nose down attitude in the Blenheim. Entirely comfortable way to behave. Now the airfield is probably behind me now on the right. So I'm going to begin a left turn, and I'm just going to maintain that same nose down attitude and descending left turn. There's my river that I want to line up on. There's a golf course over there. That's a nice little visual marker, isn't it? Very pleasant. Okay, we're bringing this bad boy around. So this is a very comfortable descent. There's my airfield, happy days. And I want to approach at about 2,000 feet, 1,500 feet on a long approach. So I'm much too high at the moment. I'm just going to let this aircraft continue to glide away from the airfield. That airfield looks like, from this angle, like it's about 10 degrees below the horizon now, which is probably, oh actually that could be about 15 to 20 degrees below the horizon. I might just extend a little bit more. When the threshold is about 10 to 15 degrees below the horizon, that gives me a nice shallow approach angle. Okay, that'll do. Good enough for jazz. Right, I'm just going to punch the propeller through to fine pitch and give it a bit of throttle. The reason I've gone fine pitch is because I want the propeller control should the aircraft stall, or should I mess this up and I need to go around. I want the instant acceleration. So from now on, for the rest of this approach, we're on fine pitch. Okay, I'm kicking the nose around to the left now. I'm definitely not approaching on a great angle, so I'm going to correct now by overturning towards the left. Airfield will be on my 2 o'clock. I'm just going to maintain this heading for about 5 seconds. And now I'm throttling back for my approach speed. I want an approach speed of about 120. So I'm just going to kill the throttle, turn back onto the field, and now my airspeed's really going to bleed off. Aircraft's getting a bit wobbly. Okay, 0 throttle now. Okay, so I've got a relatively good glide angle, but I'm much too fast. So I'm going to start dropping a bit of flap soon. In fact, this is really quick. I'm still doing 180. So I'm actually just going to pretty much nose up. I need to bleed off that speed. That'll be bled off by the time I get to that forest there, I would expect. Or those woods, rather. Okay, it's back to 160 now. This is actually pretty nice. I've just trimmed back and I'll let the aircraft fly itself for a second. Okay, airspeed down to 150. Still fast. I'm going to drop flaps sort of preemptively. It's not a great speed to be putting the flaps down, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that'll kill off some of the speed. Nose is just taking a huge dip, so let's trim that back up. Okay, I've now got 140. I'm going to start dropping the undercarriage. There goes the gear. And I'm basically just pointing at the threshold. Okay, speed's now 120. That's pretty much respectable. I probably had a bit too much height and a bit too much airspeed when I turned in, which is why my angle of approach has been so steep and so fast. Speed's coming back now, 110. Right, I can just start applying throttle. Here we go. 5 to 10% throttle on, 12% there, and that's arrested the shaking. Still airspeed's high on 110. Pointing at the threshold. Approach is looking good. Hardly any rudder required here. I'm just doing a bit of left rudder trim. Okay, now I'm just putting on a bit more sauce. A little bit high. Backing off a bit. Okay. Just using my throttle to control my aim point. Okay, less throttle, less throttle. Just bring that aim point down now, bring the throttle back on. Okay, 0 throttle now, that's a good glide. Trimming back, right rudder, trimming back, trimming back, trimming back, trimming back, trimming back. And now I'm going to start flaring. Just to bring the nose slightly above the horizon, bring the gun sight above the horizon. And the aircraft sinks onto the ground. I'm fully back on the stick almost, fully back on the stick. Using a little bit of left rudder now. And I'm not going to brake just yet. I'm just going to let this roll. Left rudder. Okay, centering the rudder, left rudder. Okay, that's a fairly stable takeoff, landing roll. And I will probably just depart to the right. So I'm just going to take my feet off the rudder pedals basically, and then the aircraft wants to swing naturally to the right. Okay, right rudder now. And I'm going to start tapping the brakes, On. You can probably hear the clicking. And there we go. I've now departed the runway. Just going to put some throttle on. I'm going to get well clear of that runway now. Because if you're flying online, please clear the runway once you've landed. Loads and loads of times I've seen people conduct a nice landing with the aircraft fully intact. Aircraft comes to a stop and they just abandon the aircraft right there in the middle of the runway. Bad form. Okay, so now we've parked up. I'm going to reduce back to course pitch. I'm going to put the chocks in, and now I'm going to turn my 2 fuel cocks off. Let's watch them go. There's one, and there's the other one. Fuel's off. And there we have it. That is how you get your loadout sorted, start up and handle your aircraft on the ground, get it airborne, climb it out, navigate around, use the autopilot, drop a bomb, get home, and land in the mighty Blenheim. I hope that helps people who might be new to the game, might be new to the Blenheim. I hope it was interesting, and I sincerely hope I see you online. As usual, everyone, good luck and happy hunting.